Annual school district meeting for the school district of Menomonie area. So first up on our agenda is the election of a chairperson for the meeting. Do you have any nominations for a chair for the meeting? Yes. All right, Rachel Henderson, myself, been nominated. Any other nominations for a chairperson for the meeting?
I'll second the nomination.
Oh, right, thank you. So the motion was by Dominique Stewart, second by Margaret Reich. Can we?
I'd ask one more time.
Okay, one more time, we ask for additional nominations for chairperson of the meeting. Do we need to do a voice vote in this case?
Yeah.
All right, so we'll do a voice vote. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Great, thanks. All right, so next up we have an appointment of parliamentarian and tellers. I'd like to appoint Dominique Stewart as the parliamentarian of the meeting. And we will appoint Samantha Hoyt and Tonya Kowitsky as tellers. All right, now we'll recognize our current and former board members. All of our, we'll introduce first our current board members. Everyone will stand up. Face the audience. We'll just go in order here. We have Dale Dahlke, Amy Little Swanson, Amber Kirsting, Dominique Stewart, Abe Smith, Carl Palmer, Angie Skillings, and Mark Hillman. Everybody. And any former board members in the audience, if you could please stand, recognize you. I see Charlie Schneider and Margaret Bright. Thank you for being here and thanks for your service on the board. And then, Charlie, don't sit down. If you want to come down here, we'd like to recognize Charlie for his years of service on the board. Next up, we have presentation of minutes from our last annual meeting. So you can see the minutes from the last meeting on page 4 of the booklet. This is for information purposes only. There's no need for a vote to approve these minutes, but we can answer any questions if anyone has something they'd like to ask or something to say about last year's minutes. All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the presentation of the treasurer's report and audit summary. So if you turn the page in your book on pages 5 and then try 6. Page 6 of the booklet. Again, this is for information purposes. If anyone has any questions or comments on the treasurer's report and audit summary. All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the presentation of the budget.
Sure. Thank you very much, Rachel, and thank you to everyone who's in attendance tonight. I'm Joel Podolsky. I'm the district administrator here in the Menomonie School District. With me up here is Leah Peter. Leah is our Director of Business Services. I'm beginning my 10th year in the school district. Leah was at 8 years, so we've been working together the past 7+ years, 8 years, working on the district budget and working on operations, and we're happy to present the budget to you tonight. Now, I know there may be questions along the way. This is a lot to try to remember. There's a lot of slides. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and we'll answer the questions as we go. We'll also ask for questions at the end, and there'll be an opportunity for people to share their comments as well. Rachel already introduced the board members, and appreciate all the work of the board members. These 9 people meet pretty much twice a month. Once in a while, a little bit more, once in a while, a little bit less. But we certainly appreciate all of their work for the school district. And before we actually get into the numbers of the budget, just a reminder of why we're here. The mission of our school district is by embracing the unique needs and using the strengths of our diverse community. It's dedicated to preparing all students to become lifelong learners, caring individuals, and responsible citizens. You can see on the screen the demographics of our school district. We have just under 3,300 students. That's the count from last September. We'll see what the count looks like this year. We're planning this year to have 253 teachers, 110 support staff, 76 paraeducators, 8 directors, 7 principals, 3 assistant principals, 1 assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction, and then myself. We have 7 schools in the district, one high school, 1 middle school, 5 elementaries. We have the Administrative Service Center up on Pine Avenue, and we also have the Bjornson Environmental Center. Last year was a great year in the school district, and we could spend the entire meeting talking about the great accomplishments of our students and staff. But just to summarize a few things to point out tonight, is all of our schools either met or exceeded expectations on the 2022 State Accountability Report Cards. Now in Menomonie, we measure success of our students in a lot of different ways, the report card being one of them, so we're very proud of that. We expanded dual credit opportunities in our school district, where students can receive credit both for graduation from Menomonie High School, but also from Chippewa Valley Technical College or the university system. Our staff members worked together to develop a multi-level system of support plan and made great progress towards developing trusting relationships with students. That was one of our big priorities last year. We offered robust professional development opportunities for our faculty and staff. We made improvements to our teacher compensation system. Bleachers and restrooms were added to the sports complex, the outdoor recreation center and sports complex right here at the high school. And safety assessments for all schools were updated, as well as the middle school solar project was completed. We're going to have a busy year this year as well. And we have 24 goals that the board approved towards our strategic plan in the different areas you can see on the screen. In addition to work on our strategic plan, other challenges will include staffing shortages that we're seeing across the country. That includes our school district. Our HR department, our administrators, our principals have done a great job hiring very talented and capable staff for this year. But make no mistake, staffing shortages are making it more difficult to staff our schools. Changes are likely to be needed in our district's health insurance plan. We've had 6 years in a row where premiums did not need to be increased, but the sustainability of that plan is something that's going to have to be studied this year. We also know that in the pool area, that facility needs some renovations. There's some structural issues that we will be focusing on this school year. And then also, probably the biggest issue, and the issue we're going to talk about tonight, is the funding crossroads that our district is going to experience, as are many other districts, with the fiscal cliff that's occurred now in Wisconsin, high inflation that we've seen all across the country, and then the new biennial budget that was approved in Madison. So to go through the specifics of the budget is Leah Theater, our Director of Business Services. I'll turn this over to Leah, and then I'll stand at the side and chime in as I see appropriate. Leah?
This budget in Wisconsin is organized into major funding categories identified by the state. Every expenditure in the SDMA is reported within a specific fund. We have an independent audit that's conducted every year, and the preliminary budget tax levy is presented at this annual meeting. The board approves the final budget, sets the tax levy in October, and state statutes limit the district's budget and impact on local fiscal decisions.
Sure. And I might have passed the torch to Leah a couple slides before. I apologize, Leah. You did a great job with that. And we do want to tell a story tonight, and I think it's important that people understand this story. And we've added some slides to our presentation. Leah mentioned, this is her 8th year, this is my 10th year. So we've done the annual meeting now year after year, and each year we make it a little bit better. But really, there hasn't been many tweaks along the way. We might add a slide here or a slide there. This year, we felt it important to add a number of new slides because it's really important that people understand the story behind our finances as a school district, but also behind the finances of public education in our state. As you might know, since 1993, the state statute has limited how much revenue can be raised through operational tax levy and general state aid. The graph on the screen is a graph that was put together by the Wisconsin Association of Business Officials. We did not create this graph, but we are using it with their permission. And as you can see there, the technicalities of this graph aren't the most important piece. The important piece is that you can clearly see that what's been allowed for revenue increases has not kept up with inflation. If the revenue increases had kept up with inflation, you can see that it would be about $3,200 more per student as opposed to what we're able to generate today. And because of that, among other reasons, 62% of the school districts in Wisconsin have already gone to referendum to raise the local revenue limit. We have not had to do that in Menomonie. We have had a referendum in the past for building upgrades, but we're talking about operational referendums. A referendum to be able to continue operating with the programming that our district has. Revenue limits, now we're going to talk about the biennial budget a little bit. So revenue limits were frozen in the last biennial budget from 2021 to 2023. And by doing that, schools like Menomonie, we needed to be very judicious with the use of the pandemic funding that came from the federal government. And we needed to use that pandemic funding to continue programming and operations. The next state biennial budget does raise the revenue limit a little bit, but it has not been enough to backfill the fiscal cliff and to account for the extremely high inflation that we've seen in our economy. Most schools in Wisconsin, I already mentioned, have reached this crossroads, and it's very likely that we are approaching this crossroads as well. Now Leah will take over and talk about our local budget.
Okay,
Is that better?
yeah, okay. The SDMA budget has a long history of sound fiscal management, balancing the budget and planning for the future. Every school district in Wisconsin has to abide by the same fund accounting, and all the major funds are spelled out here. They're also broken down in your book. I believe it's on page 7. Just going to quickly go through it. On Fund 10 is our general operating fund. Fund 20 houses several funds within there. One is Fund 21, which is gifts, donations, and the other one is special education. That is Fund 27. Fund 39 is our referendum long-term debt fund. We also have a Fund 46, which is capital improvement trust fund. And then a Fund 49 are other capital project funds. And 50 is food service. Fund 73 is our post-employment benefit trust. And then lastly, Fund 80, it's our community service fund. All of those funds combined, the total budget for the SDMA for the 23-24 school year is projected to be approximately $65 million.
So when we go through these slides, you don't have to have that memorized. We'll reference back to the fund we talked about.
This slide is a total budget history here in Menomonie. It's of the last 5 years. You'll see back in 1920, our total budget was almost 50 million. And today we're at the 65 million that I just referenced. You notice back in 2021, there was a spike that year, and that was during the pandemic. And we had an increase in our revenues. Much of that came from increased COVID aid and such, and enrollment. For 23-24 notable budget changes, some of the adds that we added in this year compared to last year was the state approved the revenue cap increase at $325. Our salary increase approved was 8%. Health insurance, this preliminary budget is including an 11% increase. Our health insurance renews on January 1st, so it's a little preliminary. We don't have our renewals yet, but this is just a starting point. This is what we estimated it to be. And then also included here, we have a new 3-year student Chromebook lease. And then reductions. So far, we've used up our ESSER 1 and 2 funds, that is federal funds related to COVID-19. Those 2 grants, we have exhausted those, and we've also used part of ESSER 3. We still have some carryover from ESSER 3 that will go into this next school year.
I have a question. The health insurance increases, does the district cover that full amount or is part of it covered by employees?
Part of that would be covered by employees as well as the district.
Just in case anybody didn't hear the question, Margaret asked, does the school district cover the entire amount of health insurance? And it's split between the district and the employees. The employees pay 12.5% of the premium.
Other reductions, we have a reduced staffing plan and a slight reduction in the Wisconsin virtual school tuition, which is based on student enrollment. Again, an estimate as of June 30th. That, of course, changes as we near the beginning of the school district. If we take a look at our Fund 10, which is our general operating budget, if we compare our revenues and expenses to last year, our revenues are approximately 15% less than last year at the same time, or 0.04%. Expenses, we're anticipating an increase of around 11.23%, or $4.68 million. We are currently projecting a $3.75 million deficit in the preliminary budget for 23-24. But that was before we knew what our ESSER 3 carryover would be. So we're expecting to close that gap with ESSER 3 funds. Probably not the whole amount, a portion of that at this time.
Before you move on, just a couple things to point out. So the revenue decrease was $15,000, not 15%, which is 0.04%. But like Leah mentioned, right now we do not have the ESSER 3 grant money in the budget when we talk about that $3.75 million deficit. So we do expect to close that gap throughout the school year.
And then we have a 5-year history of our general operating budget. You'll see for the preliminary 23-24, the blue column is the revenues and the red bar is the expenses. So just a comparison of our revenues and expenses over the past 5 years.
Leah, another thing to point out, and I know I asked this question, is that everything that we're talking about for 2023, 2000 school year, it's very preliminary. There is so much information that we don't know yet. Much of our funding is based on student enrollment. We don't count enrollment until the 3rd Friday in September. We also don't know exactly what values are going to be for the school district. There's a number of different items that we will find over the next few months, and that preliminary budget will get reined in. And the board will actually approve the final budget and set the tax levy in October. So what we're presenting to you tonight is our best estimate, knowing that there's going to be a lot more information coming in over the next several weeks. Oh, sorry, Alex, yes.
No, just to help me with kind of perspective and context, can you give like just a off the top of your head estimate of what our overall enrollment has been, like as we look at these expenses, in terms of understanding what's driving them, have we needed to prepare more staff, because enrollment increases, is it all because of, health insurance becoming more costly and we're seeing to pay our staff appropriately, just kind of understanding what's driving the changes.
Sure. Well, I would say number one would be inflation. And when we look at hiring staff and being competitive within our conference, our HR department, along with our teaching staff, and we have a group that meets, we study area compensation. And that's one thing that we've really worked hard on the last couple of years, is to make sure that we have competitive pay, especially in this environment with teacher shortages and employment shortages. So inflation is certainly a big part of it. Health insurance, again, the health insurance market has really gone up. That's a big part of it as well. Enrollment wise, we've held pretty steady. And, you know, for a number of years, we were projecting slow growth. I would say that right now, we've been stagnant, and we are watching very closely because it looks like our kindergarten and 4K classes may be smaller. The pandemic threw such a wrench, though, in the study enrollment because the number of students that might have chosen alternate options for education, whether it be homeschool options or virtual school options, we definitely have seen things rebound, but we probably don't feel that we have a very solid grasp on what the future's going to hold with enrollment. Some of our neighboring communities, you know, when I attend different meetings, we talk to demographic experts, there definitely is a prediction that we're going to see major changes across our state. However, Chippewa Valley and then west of us, we've maintained more enrollment than a lot of other places in Wisconsin. But that is something that we have to watch very carefully. Right now, my best estimate, or I can't remember how you classified it, is that we're on a pretty stable track.
If we take a look at our operating revenue as a breakdown, this pie graph shows 63% of our revenue is coming from state equalization aid and per pupil aid. The second highest percentage of the budget is coming from our local property taxes, which makes up 30% of our revenue budget. And then 3% is other, basically local funds. 2% of our budget for revenue is federal grants, and then the other 2% is from other state aids and other grants that we receive from the state.
Leah, and I know we're gonna go slow if I keep chiming in. But again, I'm trying to tell a story tonight. I want you to know that we have worked really hard in the school district over the past 9 years to try to keep that graph looking like it is, and to try to have as much revenue as possible coming from state aids as opposed to local property tax. It's getting more and more difficult, and the state aid formula is complicated. It is based on enrollment. It's also based on how much you spend. But we also try to spend our dollars in a way that maximize their value. And you'll hear in a little bit about what we've done with post-employment benefit trust, what we've done with capital improvement trust. Those kinds of things have allowed us to maximize our state support for educational funding.
Now we're going to take a look at our operating expenses for our budget for next year. 76% of our operating budget goes towards salaries and benefits. 11%, the second highest portion, is used for purchase services and communication. 6% transportation, and then the smaller percentages, 1% equipment, 3% other miscellaneous insurances and such, and then 3% goes towards supplies, books, software, things like that. The structural deficit, with revenue limits not keeping up with inflation, coupled with the expansion of district programming and mandated services, a structural deficit has been created within the SDMA budget. We are working hard and cautiously with the use of the COVID-19 funding to help balance the budget. We've done that over the past 2 years, but all of the pandemic funding will be exhausted now here at the end of this school year. So as I mentioned a couple slides back, we did have ESSER 3 grant carryover, and that estimated carryover is going to be approximately $2.8 million. So we have to build that back into our budget because this budget, was created, prior to us knowing what that carryover actually would be. So that will help offset some of that deficit that we originally anticipated.
Any questions about that slide? Oh, we both.
So I hear what you're saying is that when this ESER three is exhausted, that same structural deficit is still there, but we no longer have the ability to carry it forward. If we're gonna hit it here, if the ESER three were not carried over, we hit it immediately. Because you're able to carry over, we're gonna hit it sometime next year.
Absolutely, and we've talked at our school board meetings for anybody who's attended or paid attention. We knew that coming into this year, it was going to be a difficult year. So we planned ahead, we've done everything we can to try to bridge from end of our COVID funding to our new reality. And that's what Eve was talking about, is that by having that carryover, that helps us this year, but it's a one-year fix. The budget problems, budget deficit that we're talking about, that's a structural fix. So unless we reduce ongoing expenses, eliminate programming and other things, we are going to have more expenses than the revenue we have coming.
Back to the other slide, it's pretty much $5 million.
So we talking about the deficit?
Yeah, so you're gonna take it away, bracket, we're still gonna be under $5,000 here. For this year.
So what Amy was doing, she was comparing the carryover money, the pandemic money with the deficit. And yes, in the preliminary budget, even if we apply the entire COVID funding, on the preliminary budget, we still have a deficit. But it's not just the COVID money that we look at. You know, we build our preliminary budget and make the best assumptions we can based on enrollment, based on how many new employees will take family health insurance. You know, we always have a contingency fund built into the budget in the event that a student moves in and needs real specialized services. So we do budget somewhat conservatively. We expect that we'll be able to bring this budget home like we have in the previous 5 years and balance the budget by the end of the school. That's our goal.
Okay, if we take a look at our levy analysis, this is a breakdown comparing last year's final levy to this year's preliminary. And as Joe mentioned, we created this budget before we knew a lot of this information. Our equalized values won't be released by the Wisconsin Department of Revenue until October. And so a lot of this is based on assumptions. Our general fund is going to change, based on this estimate, going to increase 2.4 million. Our debt service fund, we're looking at a decrease of about 2.1 million, for an overall total levy increase of $333,998 or 2.16%. And then this is another chart of the past 5-year history of our tax levy here in Menomonie. Again, there was that spike in 2021, and then this year we have that just over $300,000 increase on our levy for coming up based on this.
So if you remember what I said a few slides ago about how we worked really hard to try to maintain as much money as possible from the state. So even though our budget has gone up, you can see that our tax levy has really stayed pretty stable. It actually has decreased a bit. So again, that's great work by the school board, great work by our business manager, trying to maximize state aid and really bring that value here for our community.
But wasn't that largely due to the ASHA funds? The state gave us a lot of ASHA funds that we used, but if we ended up stopping actually, we can't increase the revenue limits.
It is, Margaret. That's a big part of it as well, how the state has budgeted. And freezing the revenue limits, not just the ESSER fund, but also freezing the revenue limits and providing aid and a per pupil aid outside the revenue limit. That has also had a major impact. But our work with how we've dealt with state aid also is a contributing factor. Thanks for pointing that out.
We take a look at our property values, you'll see in the last 5 years, those have been increasing as well. Because we don't know what those estimates will be until it gets released in October, we use the same value as we received last year. So you'll see between 22-23 and the estimated 23-24, they're exactly the same. Because we don't have that information, we just always budget what we received from the prior year. Early estimates, though, are indicating that there will be an increase on those equalized property values that are set to come. And then this is our mill rate history. You'll see over the past 5 years, that has gone down a little bit sharper with last year's budget, and again, this year's budget is just an estimate. We're projecting a 0.13 decrease on our mill rate from 22-23, and it is likely that we'll see a decrease based on state aid certification and also those equalized values once they come out. If those increase, then mill rate will decrease.
Yeah, why is the mill rate increasing the last 2 years?
Well, that kind of goes back to what Margaret and I were just talking about. The levy has decreased, so that's a big part of it. But perhaps even a bigger part is the fact that the property valuation is a lot. So as valuation goes up, the mill rate, which is the rate that we generate the tax revenue from, goes down. So just to clarify, the preliminary budget has a very slight increase in the mill rate. I would bet my favorite pair of shoes that the mill rate is going to be lower this coming year than it was last year.
The voucher program impact here in the Menomonie community, we do have an impact from the voucher program, that's a statewide program. The cost of the private school vouchers are added to our property tax levy each year, and then our state aid is reduced by the amount of that additional tax levy. So if we look at last year in 22-23, we had 2 private schools participating in this within our school district. And the total cost for those schools to participate was $563,839. And again, we're estimating the voucher impact for this upcoming year because like Joe had mentioned earlier, that is based on the third Friday count, which DPI, the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, doesn't release those numbers to us until October 15th. So we have to estimate how many students we think are going to qualify or participate in that program. And then again, when we built this budget in the spring, we didn't have, the state legislators hadn't set the per pupil amount, the funding for those students for that program yet. So we had to estimate what that cost would be as well. So this impact for next year is all based on preliminary estimates that we made before we had most of the information we needed to come up with this estimate. So the total for this coming school year, we anticipate it to be $638,507.
I have a question. How is the cost per student for these schools? How is that?
It's determined by the state, and that number there, you can see whether, it depends on which program they're in, but you can see it was $8,399 last year, this year $9,499, and that's approved the legislation. This is a lot of information on this slide. I like this slide a lot better. You can see that the impact of vouchers over the last several years is increasing. Yes.
So how does the per student voucher cost compare with the per student funds.
It seems like as a state, we're paying a lot less to our public students than our that am I correct?
Right, we receive $742 from the state for each student, and then we also, the state set the levy cap at $325 per student of new money, yeah.
It's, the reason why we're hesitant to answer that question is it varies by districts in terms of how much revenue from the state you're able to generate. But yes, it's, the vouchers are receiving a fair amount.
Like 10 times more than.
Yes. Well,
I don't feel comfortable saying that.
Good luck.
and then our Fund 10, fund balance history. Now, this is our general operation, fund. The fund balance, that we have, I have broken down here in two colors. The blue, bars indicate unassigned fund balance, so at the end of the year, this is what we have in unassigned fund balance, left over, and the amount in red is designated for, health insurance because we're self-funded. We have to have a separate health insurance trust fund, and so the portion in red is specifically designated for our health insurance costs. Now, when I say on the blue, bars, that's what's left over, that's not cash in hand. Your assets minus your liabilities equal your fund balance, your equity. So there are, things tied up in that it's not all liquid. It's your payroll, payables, and your, other expenses are part of the equation. So it doesn't equal cash.
I would like to follow up on this slide because after we just got done talking about a deficit, the natural reaction would be, well, if you have a fund balance like this, why don't you just use that? And there's a few things that's part of the story that you need to know. First of all, when I came here in the summer of 2014, one of the first things that we did was establish a vision for financial security for the school district. Boards in the past have done a great job putting the school district in a solid financial position, but there was work to be done. And one of the first things that we did is we wanted to make sure that our fund balance was sufficient for cash flow. We don't receive monthly checks from the state or from local taxes to make our payroll. It comes in chunks throughout the year. So there are some months where our available cash balance is quite low as compared to other months. And if you are a business or a school district, you don't have cash on hand to make payroll, then you have to borrow money. And there are many schools that have to borrow money throughout the year through short-term borrowing or lines of credit so that they can make payroll and pay for other expenses. To me, that's just not good business because now you're paying more money in interest than what you would have to pay if you had a sufficient fund balance. So we worked very hard to get the fund balance where it is. And then the other piece to this is that if we take recurring expenses like salaries for employees and we use the fund balance to pay for those, that might work for a year or maybe 2 or 3. But if those are ongoing expenses and your revenue is not ongoing, recurring, then you're creating a structural deficit. So we do have a healthy fund balance, but I definitely would not say that it's absorbent.
Next, we're moving on to our Fund 30, or Fund 39 specifically for Menomonie. It's our referendum long-term debt. I really like this chart because it shows us the columns or the bars in red were our payment schedule prior to any refinancing that we did. That was going to be our debt service payment from the referendum that we had back in 2013-14. But along the way, we refinanced with lower interest rates. When we were able to pay down some of our debt, when we had some fund balance built up, we were able to contribute more towards paying down our debt sooner. And so you'll see then in the blue, bars compared to the red are much lower, and that is our current payment schedule. So we've saved millions of dollars in interest payments by having been saved by refinancing into defeasance of that debt.
Leah's right, this is a great slide. This is a fun slide to see how much has been saved. One thing I don't like about this slide is the way that funding works in Wisconsin. Even though we've been very judicious in our long-term debt, that gap that we've created between our scheduled payments and our new payments, those are funds that are outside the revenue. So we cannot take that savings and utilize it for programming or for classrooms. This is specific to long-term debt. So it's still very good for us as taxpayers. It does not do a lot to help the school district in terms of spendable dollars for the program.
We also have a capital improvement fund 46. That referendum we had in 2013 allowed the district to update its facilities. And along with that, we developed a 30-year capital improvement plan. And the district established a Fund 46 trust to save for those projects, or for the projected capital improvement needs. So this is not part of the general operating budget of the district. This is a separate entity or separate trust put in Fund 46 specifically for capital improvements that may need to be done, or maintenance that may need to be done. In 22-23, at the end of the school year, our fund balance was at just over $6 million. You'll see the first 4 years, it has gradually gone up. When you start a Fund 46 trust, the state of Wisconsin had a limit on there, whereas you could not start spending out of that trust for the first 5 years. You could make contributions to it, but you could not spend out of it. We've exceeded the 5 years, and we've been starting to use those funds for capital improvement projects. Sports complex is one of those, and various other technology maintenance needs we have been spending. And so you'll see in the 22-23 school year, our fund balance has gone down, but we also contribute $810,000 each year that goes into Fund 46. It's a budgeted line item where we transfer the funds out of the operational account and put it in there. We're able to do that because we had paid off our non-referendum debt, and that amount was $810,000. And so several years back, the board had decided to take those funds and contribute them into Fund 46 so we can continue to maintain our facilities.
Our community's made big investments with our facilities, and our board has done a great job, one, with handling the long-term debt like you saw with the refinancing, but also planning ahead for capital improvements. If you notice, a lot of our buildings, they were built or renovated along similar years. So when you think about your house and your roof and, different systems, your HVAC system, things like that, there are certain lifespans. So in our long-term capital improvement fund, we have planned out when those boilers are anticipated to go back, when the roof is anticipated to be replaced. It's all a guess right now. So we've gone a long ways out. We've gone 30 years out. And we're not going to replace the roof just because it's on the schedule. We're going to evaluate that roof, and if we can get by for a while, or if we can make a small adjustment to it, we're not going to replace the full roof. Same thing with the boiler. But we are planning ahead with our fund. Margaret, do you have a question?
Yes, I've been watching the contributions, and it says in our book on page 13 that the past contribution is $946. So there's revenue coming in other than that $810.
The board can determine the contribution by July 31st of each year. And In the event that we have more revenue than expenses, 146 is a terrific way to use those dollars, because when you make a contribution of 146, that counts as spendable expense. So we can get state aid on those dollars, even though they've been put into the trust fund. So yes, the final budget has not been approved yet, and you're seeing a discrepancy between the booklet and
The amount on page 13 also includes Fund 49, not just Fund 46. It's Funds 41, 46, 48, and 49.
that's the shorter answer.
Our post-employment benefits is housed in Fund 73. In addition to funding half of SDMA employees' state retirement, we also offer local post-employment benefit for most of our full-time employees. This includes contributing towards health insurance premiums, contributions to health reimbursement accounts, and then also cash stipends. We have reduced our OPEB debt and transitioned away from a defined benefit to a defined contribution. Most current actuarial study indicates that the savings in the trust have surpassed the benefits accrued by our retirees. And so at this point, we are at a point where we do not have to make additional contributions, or at least we're not anticipating making any additional contributions in 23-24. We're due for a table update. Our actuarial will do an update on the tables, crunch all the numbers, and then let us know if anything has changed in the last school year that would change that. But as of the end of June 30th, we did not have to make any additional contributions to our OPEB trust.
So if you look at this graph here, you can see that in 2009, the liability or post-employment benefits for our school district was close to $30 million. And we had saved nothing, or almost nothing. And you can see now, we're at a point where our savings is outpacing the anticipated benefits. Much of this has come because we've transitioned from that defined benefit to a defined contribution plan. But this is very good news in terms of the fiscal health of the school district.
And then our community service fund, Fund 80, the programming that is housed in this fund is community education offerings, middle school age activities, our Boys and Girls Club, and then we also have a community youth services officer in this fund. The revenue for Fund 80 is generated from a tax levy outside of the revenue limit, as well as participation fees. It makes up approximately less than 2% of the overall levy. The Fund 80 tax levy is projected to remain the same when we created this budget earlier this year. We do have a deficit as of June 30th, 23 of $35,906.82. But that is unaudited, and we fund balance, which is why we have a deficit in this fund. It was planned to spend down some of the fund balance. And again, this is a 5-year community service tax levy history chart. Going back from 1920, you'll see for the last 3 years we have not increased the community service tax levy. Prior to that, we had a little bit of a, started out lower but had to increase it, and then now it's been pretty steep.
Before we get to the future of the budget, are there any other questions that you'd like us to answer here? I know we've had several along the way. I'll keep moving on. I said earlier that the district has had a long history of balancing the budget. And as I mentioned, the school board, the current board, the past boards have done a terrific job managing their finances. A lot has helped in the fact that enrollment has been stable in the SDMA. If our enrollment does change, certainly our budget will need to change. We are mindful of that. This year is a good example. We're monitoring our kindergarten enrollment. We have reduced one section right now at one of our schools. And depending on enrollment, we will make the tough decisions if necessary. But no matter what with enrollment, either way, we are approaching a funding crossroads. The fiscal cliff, which we talked about before, high inflation, and the new biennial budget just aren't going to cut it for our current programming. The cost for this programming and the services that are mandated in our school district are increasing at a rate that is outpacing our new revenue. So as we look to the future, we're going to handle this budget. We talked about that. We plan to bridge this budget to the future. But as we look to next year and the years after, we are going to have to look at options. And as I sit here today and I think about that, or when I lay in bed not sleeping at night, really the options that I think about include the potential of increasing revenue, which would require a referendum, deferring expenses. A lot of districts have done that. They've deferred capital maintenance, capital improvements, and technology. And then the other thing is to reduce programming. So when we're here next year, I think we're going to have more to talk about. But with this funding crossroads, it's here.
Joe,
Yes.
if this is something we, in this room, should be writing our legislators about. Because that's why we've had this structural deficit, because we're not getting the revenue limit increases that are necessary to maintain our schools.
And I agree with you, Margaret, and I think you know this, that most people in this room have written their legislators, and I know you have as well. I know a number of us have testified at the Joint Finance Committee hearings over the years with that same message. We certainly appreciate that the revenue limits were increased. It's just unfortunate that they weren't increased enough to deal with, the increased costs and have put us in this funding crossroads. But I agree. I think if something doesn't change at the state level, which it's not going to in the next 2 years, there's going to be a lot of districts that have to make difficult choices, including Charlie.
I think the real answer to Margaret's question or comment is, we in this room need to get the people who are not in this room to write their legislation.
Yeah.
Get other people involved to it. The people here are involved, or here.
Anybody else? So Rachel, I think now is the time for the hearing on the budget. That was the presentation on the budget. I think it probably got combined a little bit with the hearing. And thirdly, we want to provide all taxpayers with the opportunity to share their thoughts at this time.
Thank you, Leah and Dr. Legazpi for that presentation. And yeah, if there are more comments or questions or thoughts you want to share about the budget, we do have time on the agenda for more of that. Not seeing anybody jump up. I'm going to move on. Next, we move into resolutions. So first on our agenda, we have Resolution A, which is the adoption of a tax levy for general debt service and community service funds. You'll see in your book, there's a proposed motion that there be levied upon the taxable property of the school district of the Menomonie area the sum of $15,832,292 for the operation of district schools and for the discharge of long-term debt obligations for the 2023-2024 school year. So at this point, I'll entertain a motion on Resolution A. All right, moved by Andrew Stillings. Do you have a second? Second by Ace. Any discussion on Resolution A? All right, seeing none, we vote, and just as a reminder, at this meeting, any elector of the school district of the Menomonie area, which is to say anyone who lives here, basically can vote here. So we'll just do a voice vote.
I would ask if there's an objection to that.
Is there any objection to doing this by voice vote? All right, seeing none, all in favor for the passage of the motion on the floor for resolution A, please indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? Great, the motion passes. Moving on to resolution B, this is the authorization of annual compensation for Board of Education members. You'll see in your booklet, there's a proposed motion that members of the Board of Education be compensated with annual salaries as follows. Board President, $1,000, and all other members, $800 each. I'll entertain a motion, or entertain, a motion for this resolution. Yeah. All right, moved by Alexandra Hall, second by Tina Lee. And any objection to a voice vote? Seeing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion passes. Resolution C, authorizing reimbursement of travel expenses for Board of Education members. A proposed motion that members of the Board of Education be compensated for actual and necessary expenses incurred in the performance of duties. Entertain a motion. Moved by Brian Segman. Second by Rebecca Kilby. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Right, and the motion passes. Last on the agenda is other new business within the powers and authority of the annual meeting. So the electors of the school district can bring forward new business within a pretty strict set of limitations. But we'll entertain any new business, which can include any comments. Here's the district. So if there's anyone who wishes to speak, I'm not seeing anyone jumping up. I'll ask one more time if there's anyone else who wishes to speak on any matter. Right. That's it. Then we can entertain a motion for adjournment. Moved by Amy Riddle Swanson. Second by Mark Coleman. All right. That's easy. We stand adjourned.